Ambassador Sarah Chen adjusted her simple diplomatic uniform as she walked through the gleaming corridors of the Galactic Council station. Her human delegation followed behind her, their footsteps echoing softly against the crystalline floors. What made this moment historic wasn't just that humans were finally being admitted to the Council after decades of negotiations. It was that they were the first species in galactic history to be permitted entry into the sacred council halls completely unarmed. The other species found this decision baffling, even dangerous. The Korthak delegation, with their razor-sharp natural claws and reinforced exoskeletons, had questioned the wisdom of allowing any species to enter the halls without proper restraints. The ethereal Veiltar, who could phase through solid matter at will, had expressed concerns through their translucent representatives. Even the peaceful Thornari, whose very skin secreted mild toxins, were required to wear neutralizing suits during sessions. Sarah paused at the massive doors leading to the main assembly chamber. The doors themselves were a marvel of engineering, forged from neutronium and inscribed with the founding principles of the Galactic Council in over 400 languages. 2 towering sentinel guards, members of the militaristic Zephyrian Empire, stood at attention. Their plasma rifles hummed with barely contained energy, and their combat armor gleamed under the artificial starlight that illuminated the station. Ambassador Chen, the lead sentinel, spoke through his helmet's translator, his voice carrying the metallic undertones typical of his species. "You and your delegation must submit to the standard security protocols." Sarah nodded respectfully. She had expected this moment, had prepared for it during the long journey from Earth. "Of course, Guardian Vextal. We understand the procedures." The security scanner materialized from the floor, its blue energy field surrounding each human delegate in turn. Sarah watched as the device analyzed her companions. Dr. Marcus Webb, the xenobiologist whose research had helped establish first contact protocols. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a former military officer turned diplomatic security specialist, and young Thomas Park, a linguistic specialist who spoke 17 galactic languages fluently. The scanner completed its sweep and immediately began flashing warnings in multiple languages. Guardian Vextal's armored head tilted as he read the results, his mandibles clicking, and what Sarah had learned was confusion among his people. "This cannot be correct," Vextal muttered, running the scan again. The results remained unchanged. "According to our instruments, your species possesses no natural weapons. No venomous glands, no retractable claws, no acidic secretions, no electromagnetic pulse generation capabilities. Your bone density suggests fragility compared to most council species. Your muscle fiber composition indicates limited strength." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his weathered face carrying a gentle smile. "That's correct, Guardian. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and tool users. We don't have built-in weapons like many species." "But surely you carry concealed devices," Vextal insisted, gesturing to his fellow sentinels to conduct a more thorough inspection. "Energy blades, neural disruptors, molecular destabilizers?" Captain Rodriguez spread her arms wide, allowing the guards to examine her uniform thoroughly. "Just standard clothing and basic communication devices. Nothing that could be classified as weaponry under council regulations." The sentinels exchanged what Sarah recognized as worried glances, though their expressions were difficult to read through their helmets. In the 3,000 years since the Galactic Council's establishment, every species had required some form of restraint or restriction upon entering the sacred halls. The Quilonians had their poison quills sealed, the Thermac had their internal furnaces dampened, and the psychic Mindari wore neural inhibitors to prevent mental manipulation. "This presents an unprecedented situation," Vextal admitted, consulting his superior through a private communication channel. After several minutes of rapid conversation in the clicking language of the Zephyrians, he returned his attention to the human delegation. "High Command has confirmed the Council's previous ruling. Humanity is to be granted unrestricted access to the assembly chambers." As they approached the inner doors, Sarah noticed other delegations watching their passage with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright alarm. The insectoid Hivethac clustered together, their compound eyes reflecting the corridor lights as they observed the humans. A group of aquatic Dipari in their environmental suits bubbled among themselves in their liquid-filled helmets. The inner doors recognized the human delegation's authorization codes and began to open with a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the station's superstructure. As the massive portals swung wide, revealing the vast amphitheater beyond, Sarah felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. The council chamber was breathtaking in its scope and design. Thousands of seats arranged in concentric circles rose toward a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the galaxy itself. Representatives from over 600 species filled the assembly, each delegation positioned according to ancient protocols that balanced political influence with the practical needs of their diverse biologies. At the chamber's heart stood the speaker's platform, where High Chancellor Mordak of the ancient Eternal Conclave waited to formally recognize humanity's admission to the Council. The Chancellor's crystalline form caught and refracted the chamber's lighting, creating prismatic patterns that danced. Across the nearest delegations, honored delegates, the Chancellor's voice resonated through both the chamber's acoustics and the universal translators, carried by each representative. Today we welcome the species known as humanity to our assembly. In accordance with the Treaty of Integration, they have demonstrated the fundamental requirements for Council membership: sapient intelligence, sustainable civilization, and peaceful intentions toward their galactic neighbors. Sarah led her delegation down the main aisle toward their assigned seating area. She could feel thousands of eyes, optical sensors, and other sensory organs focused on their small group. Some species tracked them with obvious suspicion, while others seemed merely curious about these strange beings who required no restraints or restrictions. As they took their seats in the designated human section, Sarah reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment. Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had occurred only 50 years ago, when a damaged Veiltar scout ship had been discovered drifting in the outer solar system. The rescue and subsequent first contact had led to decades of careful negotiation, cultural exchange, and gradual integration into galactic society. Now, as she looked around the vast assembly, Sarah realized that this moment represented more than just political recognition. It was the beginning of humanity's true participation in the galactic community, and the responsibility that came with it was both thrilling and terrifying. The High Chancellor raised one of his crystalline appendages, calling for silence as the formal proceedings began. Sarah straightened in her seat, knowing that every word spoken in the next few hours would shape humanity's future among the stars. 3 months after humanity's admission to the Galactic Council, Ambassador Chen found herself in an emergency session called by the Korthak Supremacy. The chamber buzzed with tension as delegates argued in dozens of languages, their various natural weapons restrained by the mandatory safety protocols that applied to every species except humans. The crisis had begun when a human cargo vessel, the merchant ship Prometheus, had responded to a distress signal from a Korthak military transport under attack by pirates in the neutral zone. Captain Elena Vasquez had made a decision that shocked the galaxy. She had intervened in a military engagement to save lives, despite having no weapons aboard her civilian vessel. The human vessel violated 16 different sections of the Galactic Maritime Code, declared War Leader Thoktar, his massive frame barely contained by the specialized restraint field that kept his retractable arm blades from deploying. They entered a combat zone without authorization, interfered with military operations, and demonstrated reckless disregard for established protocols. Ambassador Chen rose from her seat, her movement drawing the attention of the entire assembly. Unlike every other delegate present, she wore no restraints, carried no visible weapons, and showed no signs of the biological adaptations that made other species inherently dangerous. War Leader Thoktar, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Captain Vasquez responded to a distress signal, as required by both human maritime tradition and galactic emergency protocols. The Korthak vessel Stormrender would have been destroyed with all hands if she hadn't acted. That is not the point. Thoktar's mandibles clicked aggressively, the sound amplified by his restraint system's sensors. The human captain had no weapons, no defensive capabilities, no military training. Her intervention was not only illegal, but logically impossible. How does an unarmed civilian vessel drive off 3 Scolari raider ships? Dr. Webb leaned forward in his seat, his decades of experience in xenobiology making him particularly interested in the other species' confusion. He had spent considerable time studying galactic military doctrine and had noticed a pattern that most humans took for granted, but that seemed to baffle their alien counterparts. Chamber's main display activated, showing tactical recordings from the Prometheus's encounter with the pirates. The human cargo ship appeared on screen, its hull scarred from years of interstellar commerce. Clearly unarmed according to standard galactic classifications, the recordings show the human vessel approaching. 3 fully armed Scolari. Raiders, announced intelligence coordinator. Zelnith of the Observers Collective. Her 6 eyes focusing independently on different aspects of the tactical display. The pirates possessed plasma cannons, missile arrays, and electromagnetic warfare capabilities. The human ship carried standard cargo containers and basic navigational equipment. The recording continued, showing the Prometheus maneuvering between the raiders and the damaged Korthak transport. What happened next defied conventional understanding of space combat among most Council species. Captain Vasquez's voice echoed through the chamber's speakers as the recording played. Scolari vessels. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the merchant ship Prometheus. You are attacking a vessel broadcasting a distress signal. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. A series of harsh clicks and snarls followed as the Scolari pirates responded with what the translators rendered as profane dismissal and threats. The lead raider ship opened fire on the Prometheus, expecting to quickly destroy the interfering cargo vessel. Instead, the recording showed something that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Prometheus didn't retreat, didn't activate shields, and didn't return fire with weapons it didn't possess. Instead, Captain Vasquez did something that most species found incomprehensible. She rammed her ship directly into the lead raider. The collision sent both vessels spinning, but the Prometheus, built for the rigors of interstellar cargo hauling, proved far more durable than the pirates expected. The raider's hull cracked along multiple stress points, venting atmosphere and disabling its primary weapons. "This is madness," whispered Delegate Siran of the peaceful Dipari, her aquatic form undulating in distress within her environmental suit. The human captain sacrificed her own vessel's integrity to damage an enemy ship. Such tactics are beyond irrational, but the recording wasn't finished. As the first raider struggled with emergency repairs, Captain Vasquez used her ship's cargo manipulator arms, designed for loading and unloading freight, to grab and crush the raider's sensor array. Without sensors, the pirate ship was effectively blind. The second raider moved to attack, but the Prometheus was already in motion again. This time, Captain Vasquez used her ship's cargo containers themselves as weapons, ejecting them at high velocity toward the approaching enemy. The improvised projectiles forced the raider to maneuver defensively, disrupting its attack pattern. "The tactical analysis is clear," reported military advisor Kexvar of the Zephyrian Empire, his armored form rigid with professional interest. The human captain utilized her vessel's industrial equipment as improvised weapons. She transformed a cargo ship into a combat vessel using only existing systems and creative application of physics. The third raider, seeing its companions disabled and under attack by what appeared to be an insane cargo captain, chose discretion over valor and withdrew from the engagement. The Prometheus, though damaged, managed to dock with the Korthak transport and provide emergency assistance until proper rescue vessels arrived. War leader. Thoktar's restraint field flickered as his emotional state triggered his species' combat reflexes. This explains nothing. The human vessel should have been destroyed in the first exchange. No rational being sacrifices their ship's integrity for tactical advantage. It is suicide. Ambassador Chen stood once again, and this time she allowed herself a small smile. War leader, that's precisely the point. Captain Vasquez didn't think of it as suicide. She saw a problem that needed solving, and used the tools available to solve it. Humans don't instinctively categorize items as weapons or non-weapons the way most species do. We see potential in everything. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Species across the galaxy had evolved with natural weapons, defensive capabilities, or specialized combat adaptations. Their military thinking was constrained by these biological realities. A Korthak warrior thought in terms of claw and blade work. A Scolari raider relied on ship-to-ship gunnery, and a Zephyrian soldier deployed according to established tactical doctrines. Humans, lacking natural weapons, had learned to see everything as a potential tool or weapon. A cargo container became a projectile, a maintenance arm became a crushing device, and a cargo ship's sturdy construction became tactical armor. Dr. Webb finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of scientific observation. Esteemed delegates, Humanity's admission to this council without restrictions isn't because we're harmless. It's because we don't think like warriors in the traditional sense. We think like problem solvers. Captain Vasquez didn't see a military engagement. She saw a rescue operation that required creative solutions. High Chancellor Mordak's crystalline form shifted, casting new patterns of light across the chamber. The Council acknowledges that this incident raises important questions about human integration into galactic society. However, the fundamental fact remains. Captain Vasquez saved lives and violated no specific Council regulations regarding civilian intervention in distress situations. The emergency session continued for several more hours, but the tone had shifted. Instead of accusations and demands for sanctions, the delegates found themselves engaged in a deeper discussion about the nature of conflict resolution and the different approaches various species brought to problem solving. As the session concluded, Ambassador Chen realized that humanity had just passed another test, one they hadn't even known they were taking. The revelation came during what should have been a routine archaeological expedition. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the ancient ruins of the predecessor civilization on the dead world of Kethmaran, staring at wall carvings that challenged everything the galaxy believed about its own history. The discovery would force the Council to confront an uncomfortable truth about why humans alone were permitted to enter. The sacred halls without restraints. The expedition team included representatives from 12 different species, each contributing their unique abilities to unlock the secrets of the mysterious predecessors. The Mindari used their psychic abilities to sense emotional imprints left in ancient stones, while the crystalline Luminsari could detect energy signatures embedded in the ruin's structure. The humans contributed their pattern recognition skills and what other species had begun calling their lateral thinking abilities. It was Thomas Park, the young linguistic specialist who first noticed the anomaly in the hieroglyphic sequences covering the central temple walls. The symbols appeared to be a mixture of mathematical equations, star charts, and what looked like historical records, but something about their arrangement troubled him. "Dr. Webb," Thomas called out, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "These symbols don't follow standard predecessor grammatical structures. Look at this sequence here." Webb approached the wall section Thomas indicated, running his hands over the carved stone. Unlike their alien colleagues who relied on specialized scanning equipment and biological adaptations, the humans examined the ruins through direct physical interaction and intuitive observation. "You're right," Webb murmured, studying the symbols. "This section appears to be describing some kind of classification system. Species designations, perhaps?" He paused, his expression growing troubled. "Thomas, do these symbols look familiar to you? Not the language itself, but the organizational principle." The young linguist studied the patterns more closely, his mind working through the mathematical relationships embedded in the symbolic structure. Suddenly, his face went pale. "Oh no. Dr. Webb, I think these aren't just species classifications. They're weapon classifications." The revelation sent shockwaves through the expedition team. Research leader Vithkor of the Observers Collective immediately dispatched scanning drones to document the wall section, while Mystic Seer Naltheos of the Veiltar attempted to phase through the stone to examine its internal structure. As the team worked to translate more of the ancient text, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The predecessors, who had vanished from the galaxy over 50,000 years ago, had apparently maintained detailed records of every species they encountered. But these weren't simple biological surveys. They were tactical assessments. According to these records, Thomas reported, his voice shaky as he worked through the translations, the predecessors classified species based on their innate weapon potential and threat levels. The Korthak are listed as Level 7 combat entities due to their retractable claws and exoskeleton armor. The Scolari are classified as Level 5 predators for their acid production and pack hunting instincts. Dr. Webb felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what they were uncovering. "Keep translating, Thomas. What else do you see?" The linguistic work continued throughout the day, with Thomas and his translation algorithms working to decode tens of thousands of symbols. Each species they recognized from the modern galaxy was cataloged with clinical precision: natural weapons, defensive capabilities, aggression indices, and something called containment protocols. "Dr. Webb," Thomas said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I found humanity's entry. The entire expedition team gathered around the wall section as Thomas pointed to a series of symbols near the bottom of the classification hierarchy. The human designation was unlike any other in the entire database. According to this, Thomas read slowly, humans are classified as level 0 entities, but it's not because they're considered harmless. Look at this notation. Webb studied the additional symbols surrounding humanity's entry. Unlike other species which had straightforward weapon classifications, the human section was filled with warning markers and what appeared to be extensive commentary. The predecessors seemed to have been deeply troubled by humans, Webb realized. They're not classified as level 0 because they lack weapons. They're classified that way because they couldn't be properly categorized at all. Research leader Vithkor's optical sensors focused intensely on the ancient text. Explain this apparent contradiction. How can a species be simultaneously classified as non-threatening and worthy of extensive documentation? Thomas worked through more of the surrounding text, his translation software struggling with concepts that seemed to have no equivalent in modern galactic languages. The predecessors describe humans as adaptive innovators. They note that while humans possess no fixed natural weapons, they demonstrate an unprecedented ability to transform any environment, tool, or situation into a tactical advantage. The implications hit the expedition team like a shockwave. The ancient text described incident after incident of human predecessor interactions where humans had somehow outmaneuvered a technologically superior civilization using nothing but creativity and determination. There's more, Thomas continued, his face growing increasingly pale. The predecessors tried to study human military tactics and couldn't develop effective countermeasures. Every time they adapted their strategies to counter human methods, humans would simply invent entirely new approaches that the predecessors hadn't anticipated. Dr. Webb found himself remembering Captain Vasquez's cargo ship battle, suddenly seeing it in an entirely new light. They weren't just flexible tactically. They were incomprehensible to a species that thought in terms of fixed biological roles and capabilities. Mystic Seer Naltheos materialized from within the stone wall, her ethereal form shimmering with distress. I have accessed deeper sections of this facility through phase walking. The predecessors maintained extensive research installations dedicated solely to studying human behavior. They appear to have been genuinely frightened by your species' unpredictability. The final section of text that Thomas translated sent chills through every member of the expedition. It was a formal recommendation from the predecessor high command to their successors, whoever they might be. The entities designated as humans represent a fundamental threat to conventional strategic thinking, Thomas read. Their ability to improvise, adapt, and weaponize civilian infrastructure makes standard containment protocols ineffective. Recommendation: if these entities achieve spacefaring capability, they should be integrated into galactic civilization rather than opposed. Standard military doctrine cannot account for their tactical flexibility. The only effective method of managing the human threat is to ensure they have no reason to view other species as enemies. The chamber fell silent as the full implications of the ancient warning became clear. The Galactic Council's decision to admit humans without restrictions hadn't been an act of trust or recognition of human harmlessness. It had been the implementation of a 50,000-year-old strategic recommendation designed to prevent humanity from becoming the galaxy's enemy. Research leader. Vithkor's sensors whirred as he processed this information. The predecessor's analysis suggests that humans cannot be effectively contained or controlled through conventional means. The optimal strategy is voluntary cooperation rather than opposition. Dr. Webb looked around at his alien colleagues, seeing them in a new light. For months he had wondered why the galaxy's various warrior species had been so willing to accept humanity, despite their apparent inability to understand human tactical thinking. Now he realized that some instinctive wisdom, perhaps inherited from the predecessors themselves, had guided their decision. The Council knows, he said quietly. They may not consciously remember the predecessor warnings, but somewhere in their collective cultural memory, they understand that humans are dangerous specifically because they're not naturally dangerous. As the expedition team prepared to return to Council space with their momentous discovery, Thomas made one final translation that would haunt him for years to come. Hidden in a corner of the ancient text was a personal note from a predecessor researcher who had spent decades studying human behavior. These beings do not seek conquest or dominion. The ancient warning read, "They seek understanding and connection, but if forced to fight, they will find ways to win that we cannot anticipate or counter. The greatest threat they pose is not to our lives, but to our certainty that we understand the nature of conflict itself." The expedition's return to Council space would mark the beginning of a new era in galactic politics, one where humanity's true nature was finally understood by those who had welcomed them into the halls of power. The emergency session of the Inner Council convened in absolute secrecy 3 days after Dr. Webb's expedition returned from Kethmaran. Only the 12 most senior representatives were present, their various restraint systems humming quietly in the dimmed chamber. Ambassador Chen sat among them, the only being in the room who required no containment protocols, a fact that now carried entirely new significance. High Chancellor Mordak's crystalline form pulsed with subdued colors as he addressed the assembled delegates. The archaeological findings from the predecessor ruins have been verified by 3 independent analysis teams. We can no longer ignore the implications of humanity's presence in our council. War leader Thakatar's restraint field flickered as his emotional state triggered his combat instincts. "You're telling us that our ancestors knew about humans 50,000 years ago? That they left warnings about their tactical capabilities?" "More than warnings," replied Chief Archivist Seldana of the Memory Keepers, her tentacled form undulating within her mobility apparatus. Cross-referencing the predecessor data with our oldest cultural records reveals traces of these instructions embedded in our foundational legal codes. The prohibition against denying council membership to species lacking natural weapons isn't arbitrary. It was specifically designed to accommodate humanity. Ambassador Chen had remained silent throughout the briefing, but now she spoke carefully. "Are you suggesting that the entire structure of the Galactic Council was designed around the eventual arrival of my species?" Supreme Intelligence Coordinator Zexthul of the Computational Collective processed data streams at superhuman speed before responding. Analysis indicates a 94.7% probability that key aspects of council law were influenced by predecessor recommendations regarding human integration. The framework for peaceful coexistence was established millennia before humanity achieved spaceflight. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. For 3,000 years, the council had operated under laws and traditions that they believed reflected their own collective wisdom. Now they were discovering that their most fundamental principles had been inherited from a vanished civilization that had apparently spent considerable time studying and planning for humanity's eventual arrival on the galactic stage. Fleet Admiral Kekshara of the Orbital Defense Forces leaned forward in her environmental suit, the mechanical components whirring softly. The tactical implications are staggering. If the predecessors, with all their advanced technology, couldn't develop effective countermeasures against human adaptability, what does that mean for our current military doctrine? Dr. Webb, who had been invited to address the Inner Council, cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, I believe the predecessors weren't trying to develop weapons to use against humans. They were trying to understand how to coexist with a species that doesn't think about conflict in conventional terms." He activated a holographic display showing excerpts from the predecessor texts. "Look at these tactical analyses. They describe human military actions not as traditional warfare, but as applied problem-solving under pressure. Every human conflict they studied followed the same pattern. Humans would assess available resources, identify the opponent's assumptions about how the engagement should proceed, and then do something completely unexpected that exploited those assumptions." Intelligence Coordinator Zilneth Six Eyes focused independently on different aspects of the display. These records describe human tactics as fundamentally asymmetric. They don't try to match superior force with superior force. They change the nature of the engagement itself. "Exactly," Webb continued. "Captain Vasquez didn't try to outgun the Scolari raiders. She turned a cargo run into a rescue operation using industrial equipment. The pirates were prepared for ship-to-ship combat, not for an opponent who would ram them with a freighter and use cargo containers as projectiles." The chamber's atmosphere grew heavy as the delegates struggled to process the implications. Species across the galaxy had evolved with specialized roles: warriors, builders, researchers, negotiators. Their military thinking reflected these biological limitations and advantages. Humans, lacking specialized natural weapons or defenses, had instead developed the ability to transcend traditional role categories entirely. The predecessor records contain hundreds of similar examples, Thomas Park added, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. Humans who transformed agricultural equipment into military assets, who used mining operations to undermine enemy positions, who turned commercial shipping routes into strategic supply lines. The predecessors couldn't predict human tactics because humans don't limit themselves to purpose-built solutions. War leader. Thoktar's mandibles clicked in what other species had learned to recognize as deep confusion. But this makes no strategic sense. Improvised weapons are inferior to purpose-built armaments. Civilian infrastructure cannot match military hardware. How do such tactics succeed against superior technology? Ambassador Chen smiled sadly. War leader, you're thinking about it backwards. We don't succeed despite using improvised solutions. We succeed because we use them. Purpose-built weapons are designed to counter other purpose-built weapons. Military hardware is developed with specific threats in mind. When an opponent can't predict what you're going to use as a weapon, they can't develop effective countermeasures. The holographic display shifted to show a new section of predecessor text, translated into the common galactic script. The ancient analysis was brutally honest about their civilization's inability to develop effective strategies against human adaptability. The humans do not fight wars, the text read. They solve problems that happen to involve conflict. This distinction makes them fundamentally incompatible with conventional military analysis. They will use stellar phenomena as tactical assets, convert industrial accidents into strategic advantages, and transform civilian populations into logistical networks. Standard threat assessment protocols cannot account for their tendency to weaponize elements of their environment that other species do not recognize as having military potential. Chief, Archivist Seldana's tentacles writhed with distress. The predecessors attempted to simulate human tactical decision-making using their most advanced computational systems. The simulations consistently failed because human strategic thinking incorporates variables that other species don't consider relevant to military planning. Such as, Fleet Admiral Kekshara inquired, emotional connections, aesthetic preferences, cultural memories, personal relationships, and apparently random creative impulses. Webb replied, humans don't separate their tactical thinking from their emotional and cultural context. A human commander might choose a strategy because it reminds them of a story they heard as a child, or because it feels right, based on completely non-military criteria. Supreme Intelligence Coordinator Zexthul processed this information at maximum capacity. Analysis indicates that human strategic thinking incorporates data streams that other species classify as irrelevant to military operations. This creates tactical solutions that appear to violate logical parameters but prove effective in practice. The Inner Council sat in stunned silence as they absorbed the full implications of the predecessor warnings. Humanity hadn't been admitted to the Council despite their apparent harmlessness. They had been admitted because a vanished civilization had recognized them as potentially the most dangerous species in the galaxy and had recommended integration as the only safe method of coexistence. High Chancellor, Mordak's form shifted through several color patterns before settling on deep blues and purples that indicated profound contemplation. The question now becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? The human delegation has served admirably since their admission. They have contributed to peaceful resolutions of several conflicts and have demonstrated no aggressive intentions toward Council members, but the predecessor warnings suggest that human tactical capabilities could theoretically destabilize our entire civilization if they were turned against us. War leader Thoktar pointed out. Should we not implement additional safeguards? Ambassador Chen had been listening to the discussion with growing concern. Now she stood, her simple uniform and unrestricted movement a stark contrast to the elaborate containment system surrounding the other delegates. Honored Council members, she said quietly, I understand your concerns, but I need you to understand something about humanity that the predecessors may not have fully grasped. We don't want to destabilize your civilization. We want to be part of it. The very adaptability that makes us potentially dangerous also makes us naturally inclined toward cooperation and integration. We solve problems, and isolation is a problem we instinctively seek to resolve through connection. The chamber fell silent as her words resonated through the assembled delegates. Perhaps the predecessor's greatest insight hadn't been recognizing humanity's tactical capabilities, but understanding that the best way to manage those capabilities was to ensure humans never felt threatened enough to use them. The crisis erupted without warning 6 months after the predecessor revelations. The Void Reapers, a nomadic alien fleet from beyond the galactic rim, descended upon the core worlds with technology that rendered conventional council defenses useless. Their ships phased through energy shields, their weapons ignored molecular cohesion fields, and their tactics defied every principle of galactic military doctrine. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Galactic Council faced an enemy they couldn't understand or defeat. Ambassador Chen stood in the emergency command center aboard the Council's primary defense station, watching tactical displays that painted an increasingly dire picture. The Reapers had already destroyed 3 major colonies and were advancing toward the galactic capital with methodical precision. Around her, the galaxy's greatest military minds struggled to develop effective countermeasures against an enemy that seemed to exist outside the normal laws of physics. Their phase shift technology makes them effectively immune to our primary weapon systems, reported Fleet Admiral Kekshara, her mechanical components whirring with stress-induced overactivity. Energy weapons pass through their hulls without effect, and missile systems can't maintain target locks on ships that exist in multiple dimensional phases. Simultaneously, War Leader Thoktar's restraint system sparked as his combat instincts pushed against its limitations. Our most advanced tactical algorithms cannot predict their movement patterns. They appear to violate basic principles of space-time navigation, making conventional interceptor strategies impossible. Supreme Intelligence Coordinator Zexthul processed terabytes of combat data at superhuman speed. Analysis confirms that Void Reaper technology operates on principles that our current scientific understanding cannot explain. Their strategic behavior suggests intelligence parameters that exceed our computational models. Dr. Webb studied the alien vessels through long-range sensors, his mind working through the tactical implications of their unprecedented capabilities. Unlike the other observers, he wasn't trying to understand how the Reaper technology worked. Instead, he was looking for patterns in their behavior that might reveal exploitable limitations. "They're not invincible," he said quietly, his words cutting through the command center's atmosphere of growing despair. "Look at their attack patterns. They're following a systematic approach, targeting specific types of installations while ignoring others." Ambassador Chen moved to stand beside the xenobiologist, studying the tactical displays with fresh eyes. "What do you see, Marcus?" "They're not random raiders," Webb replied, highlighting certain elements of the Reaper fleet's movement patterns. "They're targeting Council military installations, shipyards, and communication arrays. But they're avoiding civilian population centers and industrial facilities that don't have direct military applications." Intelligence. Coordinator Zilneth's multiple eyes focused on the data Webb had highlighted. "Confirmed. The Void Reapers appear to be conducting strategic warfare rather than indiscriminate destruction. But this observation doesn't provide tactical advantages given their technological superiority." Chen felt a familiar stirring in her mind, the same lateral thinking process that had characterized human problem-solving throughout their species' history. The galaxy's military leaders were trying to match the Reapers' technological capabilities, but perhaps that wasn't the right approach. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" she said, her voice growing stronger as the idea took shape. "Everyone's trying to figure out how to fight their ships. But what if we don't fight their ships at all?" War Leader Thoktar's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Explain this tactical assessment. The Reaper fleet represents the primary threat. How does one conduct warfare without engaging enemy vessels?" Chen moved to the central tactical display, her unrestricted movement allowing her to manipulate the holographic controls directly. "Look at their behavior pattern. They're methodically eliminating Council military assets, but they're also following predictable routes between targets. They have to stop somewhere to resupply, repair, and coordinate their operations. The Void Reapers have demonstrated no need for conventional resupply operations," Supreme Intelligence Coordinator Zexthul pointed out. "Their energy signature suggests self-contained propulsion and weapon systems. But they're still conducting coordinated fleet operations," Dr. Webb realized, following Chen's line of reasoning. "Coordination requires communication, and communication requires some form of central command structure. Even if their individual ships are self-sufficient, they're still operating as a unified force. Thomas Park, who had been monitoring the Reaper's communication patterns, suddenly looked up from his analysis station. "Ambassador Chen, I think you're onto something. The Reapers are using quantum entanglement communication arrays to maintain fleet coordination. The arrays themselves are invisible to our sensors, but the quantum effects create subtle distortions in local space-time." "Can we track those distortions?" Chen asked. "Theoretically, yes," Thomas replied, his fingers flying over his control interfaces. "But even if we locate their command center, our weapons can't affect their phase-shifted technology," Chen smiled. And for the first time since the crisis began, the command center staff saw something other than despair in her expression. "Thomas, I don't want to attack their command center. I want to talk to it." The suggestion sent shockwaves through the assembled military leaders. Fleet Admiral Kekshara's mechanical systems whirred in protest. "Ambassador, the Void Reapers have not responded to any communication attempts. They appear to consider Council species beneath their notice." "That's because we've been trying to communicate like military commanders," Chen replied. "We've been demanding explanations, issuing ultimatums, and trying to negotiate territorial agreements." "But what if they're not here for territory?" She began manipulating the tactical display, overlaying the Reapers' attack patterns with galactic infrastructure maps. A new pattern emerged, one that had nothing to do with conventional military strategy. "Look at what they're actually targeting," she said. "Military installations, yes, but specifically installations that were built using predecessor technology. Shipyards that use ancient construction algorithms. Communication arrays based on predecessor quantum principles. Weapons platforms that incorporate archaeological discoveries." The command center fell silent as the implications became clear. Dr. Webb was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not invading. They're conducting an archaeological expedition." "An armed archaeological expedition," War Leader Thoktar corrected grimly. "Because they probably think we're desecrating their ancestors' legacy," Chen realized. "The Void Reapers might be descendants of the predecessors, returning to find their ancient civilization's technology being used by species they consider primitive." Supreme Intelligence Coordinator Zex Thul processed this hypothesis at maximum speed. "Analysis indicates 73.2% probability that the Void Reapers' tactical objectives are consistent with cultural preservation rather than territorial conquest. If accurate, this suggests potential diplomatic solutions that do not require military engagement." Thomas Park had been working furiously to trace the quantum distortions that revealed the Reapers' communication network. "I've found it," he announced. "Their command center is maintaining a fixed position in the Kethmoran system, directly above the predecessor ruins where we made our discovery." "That confirms it," Chen said. "They're not random invaders. They're guardians coming home to find strangers living in their ancestors' house and using their inheritance without permission." War Leader Thoktar's restraint system flickered as he struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in traditional military thinking. How does one negotiate with an enemy that possesses overwhelming technological superiority and appears to view us as unworthy of communication? Ambassador Chen straightened her simple diplomatic uniform and moved toward the command center's communication array. "The same way humanity has always solved impossible problems, War Leader. We stop thinking like the enemy expects us to think, and we start thinking like ourselves." As she began composing a message that would either save the galaxy or provoke the Void Reapers into accelerating their systematic destruction of Council civilization, Chen reflected on the strange irony of the situation. The same predecessor warnings that had led to humanity's unrestricted admission to the Council might now provide the key to preventing galactic war with their descendants. The message she was about to send would rely on uniquely human approaches to communication, emotional honesty, cultural curiosity, and the willingness to admit ignorance while expressing genuine desire to learn and understand. Ambassador Chen's hands trembled slightly as she activated the quantum communication array, knowing that her next words might determine the fate of galactic civilization. The command center had fallen silent, thousands of years of military protocol suspended as they waited to see if humanity's unconventional approach to diplomacy could succeed where conventional tactics had failed. To the guardians of the predecessor legacy, Chen began, her voice carrying across quantum entanglement fields toward the Void Reaper Command Center above Kathmoran. This is Ambassador Sarah Chen of the species called humanity, speaking for the Galactic Council. We have discovered records left by those we call the predecessors, and we believe we have been misusing technology and knowledge that rightfully belongs to your people. The tactical displays showed no change in Reaper fleet movements, but Thomas Park's communication equipment detected subtle shifts in their quantum signatures that suggested the message was being received and analyzed. We are not conquerors or thieves, Chen continued. We are children playing with tools we don't fully understand, trying to build something worthy of the legacy we inherited. If we have offended your ancestors' memory or violated sacred principles, we ask for your guidance in making amends. War Leader Thoktar's restraint system hummed nervously. Ambassador, you are positioning the entire council as supplicants before an enemy force. This contradicts all established diplomatic protocols. Sometimes the only way to win is to admit you're not trying to, Chen replied without taking her attention from the communication array. If the Void Reapers are truly predecessor descendants, they've spent 50,000 years watching younger species stumble around with their ancestors' technology. They're not here to conquer us. They're here to clean up a mess. Dr. Webb monitored the alien fleet's behavior patterns, noting subtle changes in their formation structure. Sarah's right. Look at their response to her message. They've stopped advancing on the capital and are repositioning into what appears to be a defensive formation around Kathmoran. The communication array suddenly crackled with an incoming transmission, its quantum signature unlike anything in the Council's database. When the translation algorithms finally processed the signal, a voice emerged that seemed to carry the weight of millennia. Young speaker of the weaponless ones, the voice said, its tone carrying harmonics that spoke of vast age and carefully controlled power. Your words demonstrate understanding that your predecessors lacked. We are indeed the children of those you call the predecessors, returned from the void beyond the galactic rim where we have dwelt since the Great Departure. Supreme Intelligence Coordinator Zexthul processed the linguistic patterns at superhuman speed. Analysis indicates the communication utilizes mathematical principles consistent with advanced predecessor technology. Probability of deception, less than 0.3%. The Void Reaper spokesperson continued, We have observed your species with interest. Children of Earth. Our ancestors left detailed records of their encounters with your kind, along with recommendations that we have debated for 50 millennia. Your message confirms their assessment. Humans possess the wisdom to acknowledge their limitations and the courage to seek guidance when faced with knowledge beyond their understanding. Ambassador? Chen felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. We are honored by your attention, Guardians. Our records show that your ancestors were concerned about humanity's unpredictability. We hope that our development over the past 50,000 years has demonstrated our commitment to peaceful coexistence. Indeed, the ancient voice replied. The predecessors feared your species not for your aggression, but for your creativity. They recognized that humans could not be contained or controlled through conventional means, but they also observed your fundamental drive toward cooperation and understanding. They recommended integration rather than isolation, guidance rather than restriction. The tactical displays showed the Void Reaper fleet beginning a complex maneuver around Kathmoran, their ships moving in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles, rather than military formations. Thomas Park's scanners detected massive energy buildups, but the signatures were unlike any weapon system in the Council's database. What are they doing? Fleet Admiral Kekshara asked, her mechanical systems straining to process the unprecedented sensor data. They're not powering weapons, Dr. Webb realized, studying the energy patterns. Those are construction signatures. They're building something. The Void Reaper spokesperson's next words confirmed Webb's analysis. We return now to complete the work our ancestors began. The galaxy's younger species have proven themselves worthy of the next phase of development, largely through their willingness to accept human integration without the fear and prejudice that characterized earlier civilizations. Ambassador, Chen felt the weight of galactic history settling on her shoulders. What work, Guardian? How can we assist in completing your ancestors' vision? The great teaching, came the reply. The predecessors departed not in defeat or exile, but to allow younger species the opportunity to develop their own wisdom before receiving the full inheritance. Your species, humans, were identified as the catalyst that would indicate readiness for advancement. When humanity achieved spaceflight and integration with galactic civilization, without triggering widespread warfare, it signaled that the galaxy was prepared for the next stage of development. The energy signatures around Kethmaran suddenly stabilized, and the planet's surface began to glow with patterns of light that matched the ancient symbols found in the predecessor ruins. Similar phenomena began manifesting at archaeological sites across the galaxy, as long-dormant systems activated in response to signals from the Void Reaper fleet. "We are not conquerors," the ancient voice explained. "We are teachers returning to provide the knowledge and technology necessary for the younger species to transcend their current limitations." The systematic targeting of military installations was necessary to demonstrate the inadequacy of current defensive paradigms before introducing solutions that will render such weapons obsolete. Supreme Intelligence Coordinator Zexthol's processors nearly overloaded as he attempted to analyze the implications. They are offering technological advancement that would fundamentally alter galactic civilization. The strategic ramifications are incalculable. War Leader Thoktar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he struggled to process concepts that transcended his military training. But why humans? Why were they chosen as the catalyst for this revelation? The Void Reaper response carried what might have been amusement. Because, honored warrior, humans alone among the younger species demonstrated the ability to transcend their apparent limitations through creativity and adaptation. They proved that intelligence without natural weapons could be more dangerous than any biological armament. But they also proved that such intelligence could be directed toward cooperation rather than domination. Ambassador Chen understood now why humans had been admitted to the council halls without restrictions. It wasn't because they were harmless or because they lacked natural weapons. It was because they represented living proof that intelligence and creativity could overcome any limitation, and that such capabilities could be channeled toward building rather than destroying. The predecessors designed your galactic civilization specifically to accommodate human integration, the ancient voice continued. Every law, every protocol, every tradition was crafted to ensure that when humanity achieved spaceflight, they would find a place of belonging rather than opposition. This prevented the development of the adversarial relationship that could have led to galactic warfare and delayed the great teaching indefinitely. Dr. Webb smiled as he realized the full scope of the predecessor plan. They didn't just leave warnings about humanity. They built an entire galactic civilization designed to welcome us, knowing that our integration would prove that the galaxy was ready for their return. The communication array carried one final message from the Void Reaper fleet. The great teaching begins now. Representatives from all council species are invited to the surface of Kethmaran, where the first lessons in transcendent technology and philosophy will be shared. Humans will serve as coordinators and interpreters, as their unique perspective allows them to bridge the gap between predecessor knowledge and younger species understanding. As the Void Reaper fleet settled into orbit around Kethmaran and similar formations appeared throughout the galaxy, Ambassador Chen realized that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't their tactical unpredictability or their creative problem-solving abilities. It was their fundamental belief that any problem could be solved through understanding, communication, and cooperation. The council halls where humans alone could enter without restraints had been designed not just to contain other species' natural weapons, but to provide a space where humanity's greatest strength, their ability to find common ground with anyone, could flourish. Now that strength would help guide the entire galaxy through the greatest transformation in its history, just as the predecessors had planned 50,000 years ago.